We're in a study in the book of Exodus, and last week we left Moses at the top of the mountain, right at the top of the mountain with God, and God had given him the 10 commandments and then a whole lot of other commandments about just society and different laws for society. Now, in case you grew up in a Sunday school that kind of gave you the picture that Moses went up once and God gave him all the laws, like, this downloading file. And then after a while it got downloaded and then he came down. And that was it. That's not how the story went. Okay, Moses goes up, he gets the 10 commandments, and if you watch in that was 23, right? All the way to chapter 23, he gets all these commands and laws from God, which we talked about last week. And then in 24, God tells Moses, come up to the Lord. That means Moses was down, right? He says, come up to the Lord. You and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu and the 70 elders of Israel worship from afar. Moses alone shall come near to the Lord, but the others shall not come near, and the people shall not even come up the mountain. So the elders get to come up the mountain, but only Moses gets to go near God. And very importantly, in chapter 24, verse 3 onwards, really important passage, crucial to today's story. Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the rules, and all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words that the Lord has spoken, we will do. And Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord. He rose early in the morning. He built an altar at the foot of the mountain and 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. And he sent young men of the people of Israel who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen to the Lord. And Moses took half the blood and he does all this stuff. And verse 9, Then Moses and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu and the 70 elders of Israel went up. And they saw the God of Israel. And there was under his feet as if it were a pavement of sapphire stone, like the very heaven for clearness. And he did not, that's God, did not lay a hand on the chief of men, of the people of Israel. They beheld God. And there in the presence of God, they ate and they drank. Now you just sang, okay, those songs, clothed in rainbows of living color and how great is our God and those kind of songs. God is a big God. I hope you got the picture that the worship team was painting for you. God is a big God, and just when you think you understood him, you fooled yourself. Okay? You've not even come close. He is that big. He's humongously huge and majestic. And in the presence of this God, they get together and they eat and drink and they just, what an honor, what a privilege for them. And then God calls up Moses even higher. And he says, come and wait there, that I might give you the tablets of stones with the law and the commandment. Remember the 10 commandments? God had written it. God's own handwriting. How's that for being personal? God's own handwriting. God tells Moses the commands and then he writes it down on these stone tablets. And he calls Moses and he says, you come up further on. Remember he said Aaron and all will stay there. He says, Moses, you come up further on. You come near. And I will give you instructions. And I'm going to jump from chapter 25 onwards. Okay. All the way down to chapter 32. That's 7 chapters of Exodus we're going to skip. And it's not because they're boring. They are fascinating. I've read them 4 times this 1 week. Because they're that fascinating. It's all instruction. And it's all instruction about the tabernacle of God. About the temple of God in the tent. Not the temple that David would get instructions for later. But that Moses would get because they were roaming around. Remember, they're nomads in the wilderness. So every time they would stop, they had to set up a place to worship God, this temple. And God gives them instructions. He gives Moses the instructions on how that tent would look and what was going to be inside it. And that's chapter 24 or chapter 25 all the way to chapter 31. Okay? Now I didn't just give you a brief on that because we're not going to look at it. We are going to look at it, but we're going to look at it next week. And I'll tell you why in advance. Because today we're going to look at chapter 32 all the way to chapter 33. 2 chapters. And next week we bring this whole series to a close because the last part of the book is how Israel obeyed chapter 25 to chapter 31. And so we're going to put all the law of the Lord in place and look at how Israel obeyed it next week. And that will bring the whole series to a close. But this week we're going to come at chapter 32. We want to land on chapter 32. Now you got to paint that picture in your head. Moses is up there. He's been up there with God. And down the mountain, somewhere lower down, was Aaron and all the other elders of Israel. Joshua was somewhere up there as well. He was a commander of the armies of Moses and of Israel at the time. So he was up there as well on the mountain. And for some reason, by chapter 32, Aaron and the elders are down. Back down with the people. Joshua is not. Joshua is still up in the mountain. And Aaron has come down. And it has been 40 days. 40 days from now, Christmas is over. That's 40 days. Okay, 40 days from now, you'll be at New Year. Or maybe already in the New Year. 40 days from now, for most of you, you've finished your exams, you've gone home, you've met your family, and you're already on your way back. 40 days is a long time. It's all your plans that you made, and you put money towards for this next few months, 40 days, and it's over. 40 days is a long time. And Moses was up there for 40 days. Now keep in mind, Moses was meeting God. And Mount Sinai, remember I told you, way back in I think chapter 20, Mount Sinai is scary when God meets Moses. It's just flashes of lightning and the whole place is covered in mist. So much so that the people are like, we don't even want to go close. We're scared. Okay, God tells them, don't come close, you'll die. I'm sure someone back over there is going like, I wasn't even planning to. That stuff is scary, man. There's 600,000 of us and I'm going to be right at the back of the whole lot. Okay, I'm as far from this thing as possible because it's scary. But God's up there and so all this activity is still happening up there. There's a thick fog. It's covered and there's peals of thunder and God is speaking to Moses up there. And down in the valley, chapter 32, you find the story of Israel's sin. Right at the foot of the mountain that God is meeting with their leader on. You find the story of Israel's sin. And what I want to do this evening, and I believe that that's kind of how scripture is written for us, is I want to put before you the leadership of Aaron and the leadership of Moses on display. And we're going to look at how they both compare. And it's some principles on leadership, but each of you are leaders in your own right. Each of you, someone is following you, even if it's only your sibling. Somebody is looking at you. Someone is going to follow you. Maybe you think no one's following you right now, but somewhere down the line, you will realize people were looking at you. And when people do, when someone is following you, you're a leader because someone's following. And here's some important principles that you will learn from these two people. The first principle, or should I tell you the story first? We'll just go through the story and then we'll come back and look at the principles. Right at the bottom over there, Aaron's there, the people come up to him and they're like, 40 days, no sign. Maybe something happened up there. None of us are going to go up and check because we're scared. So, Aaron, Moses is not there, Joshua is not there. That pillar of cloud is it's just sitting on top of the mountain now. The cloud and the fire together are up there. We have nowhere to go. We need to get out of this place. You make us some gods that will lead us out of here. And so Aaron says, okay, fine. He get all the gold together. He melts it all. He builds a golden calf for them. And they start worshipping it and dancing around it. And Moses comes down the mountain. We're going to look at it in a little more detail. But Moses comes down the mountain. He loses his cool. And he's like, what? And those tablets with God's handwriting, he smashes them. And he comes up to the people and he exacts his punishment on them. He goes to them and he burns that calf. And he corrects them. And we're going to look at that in detail as well. And then he looks at Aaron and he has this really interesting conversation with Aaron. And then he goes back up to meet with God and to talk with God. And that's kind of the story in a very skeleton form. Because we're going to look at it bit by bit and compare them now. The first thing you see about Aaron, and we're going to get, again, I told you I'm a good preacher, so 3 points, okay? 3 on each side, so it's actually 6. But we're going to just compare them in three different categories. The first thing that Aaron did, his mistake, is that Aaron gave in to the people. Aaron quickly gave in to the people. Look with me in chapter 32, verse 1. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron and said to him, Up! Now, I want you to realize their tone of voice, okay? This is Aaron. God said, I will make Moses like God to Pharaoh, and Aaron will be like a prophet. These guys had been in slavery for 400 years, and suddenly Moses and Aaron show up. And Aaron is the guy who did a lot of the talking on their, in fact, he did all the talking on their behalf to Pharaoh. And so Aaron's not just, some random fellow who was sleeping in the back of his tent. Aaron's the next leader. Aaron is Moses' brother, older brother. And this is a culture that was a lot like ours, an Eastern culture, where there was a lot of respect. And the elder brothers and the elder siblings, they had a lot of rights and respect in the home. So this is not just anybody they went up to. They go up to Aaron. Powerful Aaron. But there's 600,000 of them. And they sent their leaders, or whoever, the loudmouth was, the spokesperson. They send them. And he goes up to Aaron. Those people go up to Aaron. And they look at him and say, Up. Up. Make us gods. Now, why I said it was critical, chapter 24, is because Moses came down the mountain. See, it's not that they had no clue what was happening up there. Moses had come down and he told them the law of God. It's just that he hadn't shown them the tablets yet, but he came down and told them the rules. So they knew that God said, I am your God, I am one. They knew that God had said, don't make an idol. You will not bow down before an image. And yet they say, make us gods. They didn't even say God. They didn't even say, make us a God. They say, make us gods. There in that one moment, they pluralized the one God, Yahweh, who they were called to worship. And Aaron doesn't even argue. Make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, it's so trivial they make it. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what has become of him. And it doesn't even say Aaron reasoned or Aaron thought or Aaron said, let me pray. Verse 2, so Aaron said to them, and he goes on. Aaron so easily gave in to the people. So quickly. But I want to compare this, and we're going to do this a bit of jumping, okay, between the stories. So we're not going to go to chapter 32, verse 2. Now we're going to go a little further on. Chapter 32, verse 19. See, God tells Moses is up in the mountain and he's having this incredible quiet time with God, okay. He's sitting there and God's giving him all the law and he's just having his mind blown at how beautiful and how incredible God is. And God's doing all this. And then God says, while we're talking, Moses, Israel has already sinned. Go down. Go down. God tells him that. And so Moses goes down. And in verse 19, and as soon as he came near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, Moses' anger burned hot. And he threw the tablets out of his hands and broke them at the foot of the mountain. And he took the calf that they had made and he burned it with fire and ground it into powder and scattered it on the water and made the people of Israel drink it. See, Moses didn't wait for an explanation. He gets it later from Aaron, a stupid explanation, but he gets one. But he didn't wait for an explanation. He is the leader and he knows there's sin and it's got to be dealt with. He gets upset and he doesn't wait to get swayed by the people. He stands and corrects the people immediately. Aaron didn't bother to correct. Aaron gave in to what the people demanded. There's so many of them. He could have said that. There's so many of them. What will they, if I say no, what will happen to me? I'm just me. I'm just alone. I'm confused. Moses is not here. What do we do? He could have given all his excuses. But Aaron, at the end of the day, he gave in. Moses walks down. One man, Moses. And it's not even, in case you didn't know the story, the second time he goes up, he comes out with his face shining and radiant. So you know he's been with God. But that's later. That's not even happened. He just comes back looking like Moses. 80 plus something year old Moses, an old man. He comes down the mountain. And he does what a good leader would do. He corrects the people of God right there and then. You see, a good leader will correct his people out of compassion. He will have compassion on his people, but he will not be swayed by the people. He will not be swayed any old way by the people. Because today people will say this, tomorrow they'll say that, and tomorrow they'll say something entirely new that will contradict day 1 and day 2. And Aaron didn't get that. Aaron, so quickly, his antenna was not up. He didn't pick up on the plural. He didn't pick up on they need an idol. He didn't pick up on anything. And this is Aaron. He had just seen God. He had sat at the foot of God and ate and drank with his fellow brethren. In fact, the elders were part of the people who were putting pressure on him. They had all seen God. And they walked away. And Moses comes down, seeing the same God. And he does what a good leader does. He corrects the people, brings them to God. The second thing that Aaron did, having given in to the people, Aaron leads them away from God. Watch with me, verse 2 onwards. So Aaron said to them, take off the rings of gold that are in the ears of your wives, your sons, your daughters, and bring them to me. So all the people took off all the rings that were there in the ears, brought them to Aaron. And he received all the gold from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made a golden calf. Very important. He fashioned it with a graving tool. And then they said, when they saw the calves, they said, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Now I'm guessing if the people who said this are so powerful, these are the elders. These are the elders. When Aaron saw this, you'd think he'd have suddenly seen it and been like, what have I done? What have I done? When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made a proclamation and said, tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord. And they rose up early the next day, and they offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings, and the people sat down to eat and drink, and they rose up to play. Aaron led the people away from God. See, when you've lost it as a leader, when you lost the plot as the leader, that's what's going to happen to the people who follow you. That's what happens when you follow a bad leader. That's why last week Pastor Jeremy in the morning service talked about be careful about who you follow. Be careful about the kind of preachers you listen to. Be careful about the kind of books you read. Be careful about the kind of disciples you run to. Be careful about the kind of people you run to for counseling. Be careful, because when you've got a bad leader, he will lead you away from God. He will lead you sometimes to the place you asked him to lead you to. That's a bad leader. That's a bad leader. A bad leader will lead you to the place you want to go. A good leader will lead you to the place God wants you to go. And you see what Moses does. Moses is the opposite of Aaron. Moses, instead of leading the people away from God, Moses decides to get up and stand between his people and God. He decides to stand. In verse 11 of chapter 32, by then God has told Moses, he's still up on the mountain. God tells Moses, they've already sinned, Moses. You're writing the laws. They've already broken them. And Moses, and God says, he says in verse 10, now therefore leave me alone. He tells Moses, leave me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, in order that I might make a great nation of you. He tells Moses, you stay here. Leave me alone. Don't come down. I'm going there, and I'm going to consume them. I am upset, and I am angry with them, Moses, and I am going to wipe them out. And I'm going to take you, and I'm going to make a great nation out of you. Now, a bad leader, good deal. Brilliant deal. They've been grumbling and irritating me for the past. Bring them out of Egypt, they start grumbling. Water runs out, grumbling. Food comes, they start grumbling. Same food comes for many days from God, they're grumbling. Good idea, God. Take them. I've also had enough of them. I don't know why you saved them in the first place. That would have been a bad leader. But verse 11, Moses implored, he begged the Lord, his God, and said, "Oh Lord, Why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, with evil intent did he bring them out to kill them in the mountains, to consume them from the face of the earth? Turn from your burning anger and relent from this disaster against your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, to whom you swore by yourself and said to them, I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and all this land that I promised I will give to your offspring, and they shall inherit it forever. And the Lord relented from the disaster that he had spoken of bringing on his people. Moses gets up and says, I'm going to stand in the gap. God, I know you're angry. He's not even seen the sin yet. He comes down the mountain, he gets upset himself. He loses his cool when he comes down the mountain. But before he even sees it, he's like, God, hang on, don't go and consume them. And it's not because he loves the people. If you noticed, it's not because he loves the people. It's not out of, but God, there's some nice people there. Joshua, he's somewhere on the mountain. Let me go find him first. It's not because he likes the people. He says, for your sake, God, your name, you brought them out. People will look at your destroying them and they'll question you. God, don't do that. Don't do what you said you would do. In chapter 32, verse 30, this is after Moses makes them drink that bitter water. He says in verse 30, the next day Moses said to the people, you have sinned a great sin. And now I will go up to the Lord, and perhaps I can make some atonement for your sin. The second time, he's going to go and stand in the gap for the people of God. And there's a third time in chapter 3. In chapter 3, God, when Moses goes back up the mountain, God says, I'm not going to destroy them, Moses, but I'm really angry with them. So here's what's going to happen. My angel is going to go with you, ahead of you, but I'm not coming because I am so angry. If I come, I will burn them up. So you go and my angel will lead you. And in chapter 33 verse 15, Moses says, and he said to him, if your presence will not go with me, do not bring us up from here. For how shall it be known that I have found favor in your sight, I and your people? Is it not in your going with us, so that we are distinct, I and your people, from every other people on the face of the earth? Again, Moses will stand in the gap and say, God, don't leave us alone. They sinned, but God, go before us. Because what makes us special is you. That's the only thing that makes us special. It's you. Moses will intercede for his people 3 times. And Aaron would lead them away from God. A bad leader makes decisions there, spur of the moment, keeping his own security in mind. That's what Aaron did. He would have been scared if he did anything else. He'd get a slipper. He was scared that they'd have done something to him. But a good leader gets up and stands in the gap for his people. I'm going to bring a conclusion to all these 3 right at the end, and I'm going to ask you a few questions. But I want to move to the third point. And the third is this, and it's found in the conversation between Moses and Aaron. Aaron is really quick to distance himself from everything. He's really quick to distance it and throw the blame on the people. In verse 21 of chapter 32, Moses said to Aaron, what did these people do to you that you have brought such a great sin upon them? What did they do to you, Aaron? Did they torture you? Did they threaten you? Did they keep your family as ransom? What did they do to you that you caused them to sin so greatly? And listen to Aaron's phenomenal, my ESV Bible, the study Bible, it says this humorous response. That's the study notes by the scholars of the Christian world. Aaron said, let not the anger of my Lord burn hot. And look at how quickly he tries to come on alongside Moses and say, you know those people. He says, you know the people. They are set on evil. They are set on evil. For they said to me, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what became of him. So I said to them, let any of you who has gold take it off. So they gave it to me. I threw it into the fire and out came the scarf. I didn't do it. I took the gold, I threw it in the fire, I stood back and it popped out. in the shape of a calf. It wasn't me. Whereas the beginning of the chapter, it said he graved it, he fashioned it with a graving tool. He very quickly distances himself, absolving himself of any. The people are wicked, and the gold went in and came out like a calf. It wasn't me. That's a bad leader for you. That's a bad leader for you. When things start going bad, there the guys will be like, I wasn't here. It wasn't my fault. They might lie. They might not even lie. Maybe they'll just deceive you by saying, yeah, I wasn't there. They would have been there, but not there. But I wasn't there. And that's what Aaron says. He tries quickly to throw the blame off to somebody else. And I see that in my kids, my little son. And that's a sign of immaturity. When I stop him and say, Nathaniel, who did this? I don't know. And I've seen him. That's why I asked him. Okay, I saw him do what happened. He doesn't know it. Now he's starting to pick up on it. So he's not so quick to answer. But that's a sign of immaturity. That's a sign of bad leadership. A bad leader is quick to say, wasn't me. Wasn't my fault. I didn't do it. But a good leader is Moses. And I want you to see one of the most incredible statements that any man has ever made before God. One of the most powerful statements that any leader has ever made before God. Moses, when he went up to intercede for his people before God, in verse 31 of chapter 32, Moses returned to the Lord and he said, alas, these people have sinned a great sin. And he's telling God the report of what happened. They have made for themselves gods of gold. But now if you will forgive their sin, God, will you forgive their sin? But if not, if you're not going to forgive their sin, God, please blot me out of your book that you have written. Why would Moses do that? See, he wasn't even down with the people. He was up in the presence of the holy God. He wasn't there. He didn't even fashion the calf. He didn't write a memo that said, okay, go do whatever you want. He didn't do anything to be part of the sin. He wasn't there at all. If anyone had a right to say, it wasn't me, it was Moses. The only other one who had a close right to say that was Joshua, because he was somewhere halfway up on the mountain. But Moses was right at the top with God. No other man in the history of humanity was as clean as Moses in the context of sin, right there. There has been nobody else who was more justified to say, it wasn't me. Never have ever will anybody be as or more justified than Moses to say, it wasn't me. It was totally, absolutely not him. And God knew it. And he knew that God knew it, because God told him, I'm going to wipe them out and I'm going to start fresh with you. So he knew it. He knew God knew it, that he was clean. But while Aaron tried to shift responsibility, Moses says, I'm the leader. I'm responsible. And this drives home a point that I heard Andy Stanley make in a sermon of his. When I was listening to this video that says taking responsibility for your wife. It's a lesson I learned when I watched that video. And it's a lesson I've tried to put to practice with a lot of difficulty in my life. To be able to say, it's not my fault, but I'm responsible. It wasn't my fault, but I'm responsible. The team is mine. They botched up. I wasn't there, but I'm responsible. You gave them to me. God, I'm responsible. And if we will learn to do that with our life, we will be leaders that will shape and redefine tomorrow. To be able to say, it's my responsibility. And God, if we fail and you're not going to forgive them, then blot me out as well. God, if you're going to erase this whole chapter from this great book that you're writing, the whole story of history that you're writing, if you're going to just forget about this whole bunch of people, I'm the leader. Blot me out as well. Nobody else has said something like that to God. And I believe it is this heart of Moses, a good leader, a shepherd of the people, that allowed God to grant his request. When Moses later says, God, I want to see you. That's his heart's desire. Look at this man. He's the leader of 600,000 people. God wants to wipe out everybody and start afresh with Moses. God would have given him anything. And he says, the desire I have, I want to see you. I just want to see you. God says, you can't see me and live, Moses. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to hide you in the mountain. And I'm going to pass by. And as I go away, you will see my back. And only Moses has ever seen the form of God. He's the only one who has seen the form of God, even though it was just the back. He is the only man who has that claim. In fact, he's the only man who God would later say, who is like Moses, who I can talk to like a friend? Who is like Moses? Aaron just gave in to the people. Aaron led them away in his weakness. And when everything was done and he got caught for it, Aaron tried to shift responsibility. Moses led the people in a way that he corrected them when they needed it. He didn't shirk away from it. He didn't try to win any favors from anyone. He didn't go around, I don't want to step on toes. He corrected them when it was needed. Moses interceded for his people. He stood in the gap for his people. He didn't turn them away from God. But while they were turned away, he stood in the gap so that God wouldn't turn away. And Moses took responsibility for his people. Moses takes responsibility for his people. And so I want to ask you this evening, because God has called you and me to be leaders. See, he's called you to make disciples. If you're going to make disciples, you're a discipler. And a discipler is a leader. So if you're going to be obedient to God, you're going to be a leader. What kind of a leader are you going to be? Are you going to be the kind of leader who, when God says, what happened? Your disciple, little bit questionable character. Are you going to be like, I don't know why I picked him. I tried my best, but he's just lazy. Doesn't get up, doesn't read his Bible. I've tried, God, I've really tried so much. Deal with him. Do something to him. Are you going to be that kind of a leader? Are you going to be the kind of leader who's going to tiptoe around the people who are following you? Are you going to be the kind of leader who's going to, in the way you lead them away from God because they asked you to take them somewhere else? What kind of a leader are you going to be? Are you going to be the one that will lead in such a way that God, if he had to, would choose to start afresh with you? Not that he would, by the grace of Jesus. But if he had to, would he look and say, who is like this person? Who's like them? Look at them. They don't have to, but they stand in the gap. They don't have to, but they correct. They don't have to, but they take responsibility. Who is like this people? Whether you're in the secular field, whether you're going to be a ministry worker as you grow older, the world is waiting for good leaders. And here's the secret. God's not waiting for good leaders. God is waiting for good shepherds. Shepherds after his own heart. And Moses in these three displayed that he was not a leader. He was a shepherd. He was a shepherd of the people of God. A man after God's own heart. A friend of God. See, it's easy to sing, I am a friend of God. But it's a whole other thing to live the life that is a friend of God. So I want to give you some time in quietness. You ask God and say, God, I don't know, God, if I'm the kind of person. God, I even in the non-spiritual, I seem to pass responsibility off very easy. God, I give excuses a lot of the time. God, I've led people away from you by mistake, by my own weird attitudes, my own reactions to things in their life. God, I've shied away from correcting people. I was scared I'd do it in the wrong way, or I was scared, or I just thought, let somebody else do it. Someone's going to get annoyed with this sometime sooner or later, and they'll correct them. Maybe you want to come before God this evening and say, God, I want to be that kind of a person who would pray for people while their backs are turned to you. God, I want to pray for them. Maybe you want to be the kind of person that would say, God, help me correct people, not out of anger and not out of pride, but help me correct people out of a burden that people would walk with you and walk right with you. Maybe you want to pray and say, God, it's time I took responsibility. God, it's time I start being responsible. Stop making excuses. Stop blaming others and stop saying it's not my fault. And start saying, God, what must I do? I want to be responsible.